Back to the book. In the autumn of 1967, with the lengthening shadow of the Vietnam War spreading a chill across America, I moved on from the carefree pursuits of undergraduate life at the College of William and Mary and joined the Marine Corps. Like my father, who had enlisted 50 years earlier during the war to end all wars, I traveled from rural Virginia to the Marine Corps recruiting station in nearby Richmond in search of something larger than myself. I had drifted through previous 4 years drinking beer and chasing girls with a singleness of purpose that belied my lack of meaningful direction, and now on the threshold of manhood and with war as a backdrop, I realized the time had come to put my frivolity aside. So obviously, he goes to college, he gets done with college, and he says, I'm going in the Marine Corps. William and Mary in the months prior to my departure was still the sleepy southern campus whose quaintness had attracted me 4 years earlier. The carnage taking place in Southeast Asia had remained a distant and non-intrusive reality for all but the most perceptive of us, insulated as we were by youth and inexperience. So even with the Vietnam War going on, like, they weren't even paying attention to it. Even Lou Poland wasn't paying attention to it. There were, however, signs of a more ominous nature. The networks had begun reporting the rising casualty tolls on the nightly news. I viewed the graduation that ended my student draft deferment and qualified me for the Marine Corps Officer Candidate Program as an opportunity rather than a burden. As I entered the recruiter's office, I was acutely aware of the impact that my name would have on the sergeant whose duty it would be to convince me of the golden opportunities that a hitch in the Marine Corps could provide. The Marine Corps builds men, the decal said on his office divider, and I, in my youthful exuberance, never paused to consider that the Corps might do the opposite. When he realized who I was, the sergeant dispensed with his usual sales pitch and concentrated on the mechanics of becoming the recruiter who signed up Chesty Puller's son. The recruiter also telephoned Marine Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. to obtain a waiver for my poor eyesight, and the authority on the other end of the line at first demurred, but then acquiesced when he realized that if he stood firm, the Corps would fail to sign up the son of its most famous Marine because of a technicality. I returned to Saluda to await orders to Quantico for basic training. My older sister's husband, Captain Bill Dabney, was already serving a tour as a Marine infantry company commander in Vietnam, and she too was back at home sitting out our generation's initial venture into the war. After a childhood diet of Hemingway novels and John Wayne movies, along with my father's example, I viewed my own prospects, if not with eagerness, at least with equanimity. The camaraderie of the fraternity, he talks about how he's in a fraternity and whatnot when he was at college. The camaraderie of the fraternity now seemed almost trivial. And although I often drank myself to the point of oblivion, I could not escape the feeling that for me, the carefree celebrations of youth could not be recaptured. Of all my acquaintances at William and Mary, only one had been touched by war for which I was headed. Brian Spear, the president of a neighboring fraternity, whose dreams of manhood I had been privileged to share in frequent late-night bull sessions, had preceded me into the Marine Corps and had been killed within months of his arrival in Vietnam the previous June. His death saddened me and brought home the intimations of mortality with which most of my circle were blessedly unfamiliar. During this, you remember Charlie Plum talking about when they were at the Naval Academy and they weren't even talking about Vietnam? It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very similar. It must have been, I guess they didn't have the 24-hour news cycles like we have now, and the internet and the stories and the clickbait and all that stuff going on, and those things could be a little bit more isolated.
Yeah, like you got to choose to follow it.
Yeah, you have to seek out the story a little bit.